Hello Starlets, welcome back. I'm sorry this video is a little bit later in the week than I would prefer. It's been a really long week. What's been happening in the world this week has been happening in my own life this week. Feeling all of the emotions from the tumultuous tide of social change left me feeling quite sick towards Wednesday, Thursday into Friday, and so I'm making this video a little later than I would prefer, but I am determined to get this and the other one out today and tomorrow, so fingers crossed. In this particular video we're going to be taking a deeper look at Baba Yaga, some of the energies that came through when I began to channel her, what I think is going on behind the scenes, picking it into the energies behind the mythos, and really honoring Baba Yaga for all that she is. So to start that, I'm going to read to you Baba Yaga's soul song that I channeled for her, to bring in that energy and to open up the conversation. Baba Yaga. I open my jaws wide, hungering for your demise. After all, it is you that has sought me out, here at the edge of death, lamenting your treatment at such cruel hands, tears staining your lovely cheeks and gritted teeth. Eat, take what you will, consumption of decaying flesh, and step through the broken gate and on. I have held vigil for your troubled soul that lingers at the brink, seeking retribution. So what is it to be, little soul? Live on or die? All the world's wisdom and all of its woes lay here before you. What remains now is choice. To me, Baba Yaga is not simply, I just felt a hand right on my arm. It made me jump. Spirits, you gotta love them. So I wrote this about Baba Yaga. The legends of Baba Yaga present her as a ferocious figure, a hideous hag of tremendous power, to be found deep in the Russian forest in a wooden hut atop chicken legs, surrounded by a fence of human bones, or human heads, depending on the mythos. Baba Yaga could help you or eat you for dinner, depending on her mood and how well you performed her tasks. As always, Crone energies are fascinating as we unpick the binding that declares older women hideous because they are powerful and dangerous. Doubly so in the cases of witches in the woods, with the ability to speak and command the spirit realm, which, given the spirit just touched me on the arm, is interesting. Baba Yaga had unseen forces that would carry out her will, ability to control all of the elements and command the three horsemen, my bright dawn, my red sun, and my dark midnight, because they control daybreak, sunrise, and nightfall. As a liminal creature with so much power, perhaps it is inevitable that her nature, like other magical beings that are one with the earth, are showcased as being fickle. Baba Yaga actually appears to act, in my opinion, as a psychopomp, not only through communing with spirits, but also by setting out challenges that determine whether or not a person will live. The psychopomp, if you're confused, acts as the bridge between the living and the dead, often carrying messages to one or the other, or moving souls between life and death. The idea that consumption moved an individual to the underworld, being eaten, so that their soul could be reborn, is not unusual and is found in death tales across the world. The one that is obviously closest to my heart is the crows on the eating carrion on the battlefield. Was actually about them consuming the souls to fly them to the other world, and that's from the Celtic tradition. Baba also facilitates rebirth, as is particularly evident in her stories concerning Vasilia the Beautiful, who we talked about in the podcast, if you guys haven't listened to it. Vasilia certainly would have died at the hands of her cruel stepfamily, if perhaps she had not already. It is my belief that these stories may have involved journeying to the underworld by souls who had either suffered incarnational death or were close to it, and Baba, as a liminal creature, wielded the power of life and death, tested these souls to determine if they should be reborn or if their life tale in this incarnation was not yet told. The consumption of an unworthy soul by a devourer makes sense when cross-examined with other soul judgments taken from history, for example, in the Egyptian pantheon, where the soul was weighed against the feather and they could be devoured for all eternity or move on to a sort of heaven afterlife kind of thing. And Baba certainly seems to have a penchant for mistreated women. So mistreated women, mistreated children in life seem to end up at Baba's hut, and I think that's no coincidence. I will talk about this next bit. The next bit is to do with the creations that were made for Baba in particular, but I think it's worth just the temple of Baba Yaga presents itself within her hut, surrounded by wooden beams, drying wild herbs, a table of handcrafted foods, desserts, and spiced beverages. All the world's wisdom and all of its woes lay here before you. What remains now is choice Baba Yaga in meditation, which of course was developed into the entirety of the soul song that you have just heard. The energy of Baba Yaga connects you to your wildest self, beyond life and death, and speaks to you of yourself. The energy of Baba Yaga is the perfect companion for shadow work, working through cosmic ties, karmic difficulties, and personal choices. Is to honor the beauty beyond what is seen with the eye, and to honor the wild women in our ancestry who've been discredited as hideous because they were powerful. So there are a number of key themes here which I think are really important when looking and deep diving into the energy of Baba Yaga. She's presented as a hideous hag in the folklore of the Slavic kin. And as I mentioned in the podcast itself, like her nose was supposed to be down to the floor, very old, very decrepit, very hideous. And she's always presented this way. But she is so powerful, having command over all the elements, communing with spirits of all kinds, having control over daybreak, sunrise, and nightfall, of the way that life is structured in the light. It just makes me feel that her power goes beyond that of ugly old witch in the woods. It feels like this deep, dark goddess energy filtered into lesser mythology again, which is what happens with a lot of these dark goddesses. Goddesses that some fear, goddesses that rule over elements of life and indeed of death. So when I say that I feel that the story isn't quite what it seems, I feel like that she is a gatekeeper, a psychopomp between the realm of life and death. Taking folk stories at face value is not something that I ever am able to do. I'm always looking for the hidden clue, unraveling the weave and the weft, seeing what is beneath that story, what matters, what is important. And to me, I wondered whether Vasilia the Beautiful, as mentioned in the podcast, but we will quickly recap here, who is someone who sought out Baba Yaga, was put by tests by Baba Yaga to basically get revenge on her stepfamily, her cruel stepfamily, and she actually succeeds in this, and Baba gives her a skull lantern to take back, and it burns them all to the ground, it kills them all. And my impression of this story was perhaps one of two things, bearing in mind that Vasilia is also called the Bright and the Beautiful. My first thought was perhaps Vasilia was already dead or near death at the hands of the cruel family, the cruel step family. And I couldn't decide. Perhaps she was already dead. She'd already, because to be cast out in that way, to be in the woods, to be seeking out retribution, it felt like a soul with unfinished business to me. It felt like going to the gateways of death, or perhaps that these are souls traveling, and they have not quite died. I feel like that is how I feel it is closest to what I'm getting the feeling of behind the story. That these mistreated souls at the hands of the step families, which is usually the case in these mythology. I mean, it's a little bit stereotypical Cinderella fairy tale style, but still, it happens in more than one of Baba's fairy tales. And these souls travel through the woods, which in folklore were in places of mystery, magic, unknown forces, spirits, and death. Still are. Although we've sanitized them, which is sad. But so these souls then travel through this wilderness, and Baba Yaga is a hut, right? And she controls spirits. She controls the horsemen that bring the dawn, the day, and the darkness. She's so powerful and occupying this liminal space in the forest on chicken legs. So she's not just in a hut. She's already like up in the air. She's between air and earth at the very least. And this house has almost half transmogrified and become living. And chickens will fuck you up. Like, people are like, oh yeah, little chicken, blah blah blah, but chickens are aggressive. Like, chickens are aggressive little things. But there's also something in that that chickens quite often, or it is a rooster head as well, isn't it? But it gets interchangeable, I think. It could be rooster, and rooster would actually make more sense, because rooster would be the crowing of the dawn, and if she rules over the dawn, and then the crowing of the soul. So, okay, that's just in my head. So if it's a rooster house, and that crows for the coming of the dawn, crows for the coming of rebirth, and the cycle continues, and also their feet might scratch at the ground, bringing up seeds and dirt and things in and of the earth that would both be seeds of rebirth and growth, but also like pulling up grubs and things which would decompose things that were in the earth. So digging up worms, and worms would naturally help to decompose the dead and become worm food in the earth. So she's sort of in this really interesting liminal space anyway. It's very otherworldly. It's very evocative. Like, the image that most people know when it comes to Baba Yaga is of the house rather than her herself. Probably because there's something very strange going on with the way that she looks. It almost feels so exaggerated, like it's a show. And I feel that her looks, which is going to be a whole few videos, the look shadow, the beauty shadow, and things around that, is exaggerated on purpose, because it is exemplifying how we are afraid of death, that we see those representing death are often presented as being hideous because we're afraid of death, as the human, as the human condition is to be afraid of incarnation death, the great unknown. And if she resides in between all of these liminal spaces, these in-between spaces, then that's why she's feared, as well as the idea that, a crone in her own power by herself, needing no man, has been a huge threat to society throughout history. Witch trials. Quite often the witches, not all of them obviously, but quite often the witches that were gone after in the history of witch trials were older widows with money and power, and the men in the villages could not allow it. So those, they would go after them. and declare them witches and hang or burn them. And Baba is fickle. She's presented as being terrifying and sometimes, you know, not very pleasant to be around, and consumes people, eats people at her huge feast. And honestly, this massive huge feast energy also brings in this idea of psychopomp or otherworldly stuff. You know how you're not supposed to eat anything in the realm of Fae, or you end up staying there? Well, that's very tied into eating food of the dead. You're not supposed to do it. That's that Hades mythology. Like, eating half the pomegranate meant that Persephone would have to stay. We've had a whole discussions about whether I think that's on purpose or not in other places, so we're not going to repeat that too much here. But the whole point is the consumption of something ties the soul to the underworld, so they cannot leave or completely leave. So the fact that Baba is surrounded by food, she's shown to be cooking, she flies about in her mortar with her pestle, like it's almost like a boat, which I love, also brings that witch element into it, but it's also herbs, food, consumption of food, and there is that underlying mythos within it, which makes me feel that like massive spread to tempt children. It's very Hansel and Gretel almost as well, isn't it? Like witches and their power through food, which has accuracy. You know, cooking is soul work. And there is a lot of life and death that happens around food as well. Like, some of the big key moments of life and death are celebrated with food. And so the consumption of things, and even into things like Christianity, where they consume things to represent Christ. This, you eat of my body, you drink of my blood, and the transmutation process is considered very serious by some in that faith. But it also goes across to many different places in history, different cultures. Food is a key pivotal point, and I've already mentioned, you know, the consumption of what an individual's flesh is believed to like transport them to the underworld in many mythologies too, which that again makes me think of Baba as being a liminal psychopomp, a creature of both life and death. And she has this power over spirits, to commune with spirits, but also to command them. And that to me is immediately death vibe, like goddess of death vibes. That's immediately what that feels around that energy. And so if Vasilia was already dead or on the brink of death, and the other children that were already dead or on the brink of death came to her, and it kind of feels like that being tested, being pushed, and people are very have mixed feelings about the Baba folklore, because she never just helps. The individual has to help themselves. The individual has to prove themselves in a situation so that they get what they're after or not. And that to me is immediately death vibes. Like, it's immediately like, how much does this soul cling to this incarnation? How much do they want what it is that they want to live for, and continue to live for? And how much do they want that? And in Vasilia's case, she wants vengeance upon her stepfamily, and so it just aligns really interestingly. I mean, she's called beautiful, right? And it's we're going to talk about beauty shadows in depth with this myth and all the energies around Baba and what she's brought into focus so far, which it's already started happening in major places. So she's called beautiful, and she goes and burns her entire stepfamily to the ground. But sure, I mean, I'm wearing my Daenerys style wig, and you know, she was beautiful and also burnt everything to the crispy ground. So I guess, you know, there you go. Through lines with wigs, you're welcome. So the fact that she takes a lantern as well from Baba to burn the stepfamilies to the ground to enact vengeance. So if that makes more sense to me in terms of Baba being like, yeah, I don't care about it, you passed my test, so here's a lantern, go kill. It makes more sense to me if Baba is actually enacting a kind of role of underworld justice there. That if that step family had tried to murder and take away Vasilia's life before her time, then they would have committed treason against natural law. And so it makes more sense to me that Vasilia, having proven this to Baba Yaga, having passed this test with, by the way, a spirit doll of her dead mother, that talks to her and gives her assistance. Witch in the making, Vasilia, just saying. But she already was having communion with the dead. So the dead were already guiding Vasilia. And it also brings into question whether or not the mother was taken against her will, taken against before her time, because the spirit was still communing through this doll with Vasilia. Vague. It's possible. But what is within the myth is Vasilia passes this test with this assistance from the other world. So perhaps this cruel step family were trying to take her life away from her before the natural order of things had determined that that was the time. And Vasilia, having proven this to Baba, having proved that her vengeance was worthy, passed the test and went back with a lantern. Now, a lantern is a really interesting image, because that's again psychopomp vibes. It feeds over into the hermit card and imagery. It feeds over into Hecate imagery, which is that big powerful witch, queen of all witches vibe again. But it also has that very, it has that very psychopomp vibe to me, because it immediately makes me think of processions of the dead which hold lanterns out to guide the way through to the underworld. And that is true in a lot of Fae myth, which this is very close to in a lot of ways, which ties into Celtic myth, of course, and also the Japanese have that with the processions of the spirits of the dead. So it immediately takes me into that, like crossing the bridges with the lanterns held out in front to guide the way. And then Will-o'-the-wisps is another fascinating example where lights guide people astray into death. So that guiding light is very interesting that Baba gives her that, bearing in mind that she also controls the dawn, the sunlight, and the dark midnight. So sunrise, daybreak, and nightfall. She controls light, and she gives Vasilia a fragment of that in a lantern, which burns everything to the ground, which is basically given her like a tiny little fragment of the sun, the giver of life energy and life force, to burn down those that have betrayed natural law. And it is in a skull. It's a skull lantern, from what I was reading as well. Skull being the seat of the head, seat of the soul in a lot of mythology. It definitely represents the head, the human condition after death. A lot of, you see skull and you immediately go death, right? It's a very on the nose symbol for these things. So that, there's that. So I really do feel as well that because of the way that a lot of the mythos is around children coming to Baba, and like women who seem to have been treated ill, abused women tend to show up wanting life, wanting a better life, wanting happiness, wanting revenge in a lot of cases, with Vasilia especially. And it feels that Baba is particularly present for those who've had their power taken away from them. And it doesn't feel that Baba is particularly, quote unquote, an evil figure, which she's presented as the villain quite frequently, but it doesn't feel that way to me. It feels more like death goddess energies that are very seeking the balance of the natural order. It doesn't feel vengeful in herself. She honors vengeance, and she definitely feels like an earth goddess as well. It's very Hecate vibes as well in that sense, because nature is not kind or cruel. It just is, and it manifests itself in different ways, and human beings apply emotions to that, the reasons to that, good or evil to that, and nature just doesn't care. Nature just is. So human beings kind of personify that to me. I also did share earlier in the week, and I really want to talk about that a little bit, this ritual that was present in red tent ceremonies, which really made me think of Baba and her having bones around, or hanging heads around. So I shared that at the beginning of the week, and it was a ceremony where these red dolls were being hung on trees to honor the ancestors that had fallen before us. And in the ceremony, people were taking red cloth and they were tying, they were putting herbs and things in the red cloth, which was a circle, and then they would tie it up and make that a head, and then the fabric is the doll, and then hang those on trees. And I was like, well, this is Baba AF. The minute I saw it, I was like, oh my goodness. And it really resonated with me. And it's not something I've ever done in my particular red tent ceremonies, although I did share it with the priestess who runs them. And to me, those dolls look more like heads, I have to say, which immediately put me on the Baba heads, because supposedly the little skulls that people would see around the forest are known as Babas, or golden Babas. And I was like, so it really was interesting there, because that gave a witch, priestess, ritualistic crossover that just happened in everyday life, synchronicity. It's not something that is definitely associated with Baba or anything. As hanging all of these dolls up on trees, which Baba is in the middle of the forest, to celebrate fallen women and women's stories who went unheard, and women who had bled for us, and women that were our ancestors, and weaving that story into the very trees. And to me, that was very, very Baba, who was communing with spirits, was communing with the ancestors, was communing with the souls, and was it this gateway between life and death, and was assisting that process for others. And maybe being devoured isn't so much that they were, their life was taken from them by Baba, but was rather the crossover, the exit between this life and the next. Because as I already said, worms in the ground consume the physical body as the soul is released. So if the physical body is consumed in that hut, in that liminal space, and that's about the decomposition of the body as the soul moves on to the next incarnation. So I was really interested in that ritual, and how that really reminded me of Baba energies, and how I feel like she does stand for those who have been abused, those who have been taken before their time, when the unnatural law is broken. So if they had the will to go back into their life tale and change the ending, then that soul would go back to the body, and vengeance would be taken with this unnatural, supernatural assistance from Baba. And that's just how I felt about some of her energies. That's some of the story that I felt behind the story for me personally. It's all my opinion. It's all based on, how I felt about things, but I like it. It feels right for me. So I just thought that was interesting. I thought that I would share that with you guys. Thank you for being with me this week. I know it's been a little bit slow this week, and the content is basically going to be all weekend. Basically, and maybe bleeding into next week's content a little bit, just because of the state of the world. So if you're having a very difficult time with everything right now, with the way everything is going on, depending on if I make this video live or not later, it may not strike with the same resonance as it does right now, but it is something that's happening in the world right now. So that's it for now. Many blessings, all my love. Talk to you soon.